All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into some pretty fascinating material about Donald Trump's life before he became
Mm,
president.
okay.
We're taking a look at this overview from the Miller Center at the University of Virginia,
Yeah.
really focused on his career, his business dealings, just his whole life leading up to stepping into the political world. Our mission here is to kind of give you a concentrated look at the key experiences and decisions that really shaped him, before he ever thought about running for office.
Right. Yeah.
So, what we're going to try to do is give you a sense of like the core of his background, right? Like where did all this come from? And we're doing that by drawing directly on this historical overview that we've got.
Yeah, this historical overview you provided is really quite comprehensive. There's a lot of information in here. And so our goal is to kind of extract some of the essential elements
Yeah.
that will really help us to paint a clear picture of Donald Trump as a businessman and also a public figure leading up to his time in office.
Right, right. Okay, so let's jump right in. I mean, we're gonna start with his beginnings. I
Yeah.
mean, this is Donald John Trump.
Mm-hmm.
He was born on June 14th, 1946. So, really interesting to think about the family origins, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, his mother, Marianne McLeod, she actually she immigrated from Scotland in 1930.
Mm-hmm.
And his father, Frederick Grace Trump Sr., was a first generation American.
Mm-hmm.
His parents had emigrated from Germany.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it, to kind of consider how that background, right? I mean, coming from a family, multiple generations of immigrants,
Right.
how that might have influenced their drive and ambition.
Totally.
It's a very common thread we see
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the American story, right? But to kind of, rise and establish themselves in New York.
And they had a big family, right? There were 5 kids total. So, an older brother, Fred Jr., oldest sister, Marianne, and then 2 younger siblings, Robert and Elizabeth. And they all grew up in Jamaica Estates,
Hmm.
which is a pretty upscale neighborhood in Queens.
Yeah.
So, that already suggests a certain level of comfort, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, growing up in that kind of environment
Yeah.
undoubtedly shapes, your early perspectives, right? The opportunities that are available to you.
Yeah.
It really provides a certain foundation, I
Yeah.
think, that influences, your future endeavors.
And a big cornerstone of that foundation was his father's business.
Yeah.
So this is Elizabeth Trump and Son. And it's kind of interesting, right, that it was named after Fred Trump's mother
Right.
and himself.
Yeah.
So Elizabeth Trump and Son.
Right from the start, there's that real family,
Yeah.
aspect to it, right?
Yeah. And what they were focused on was building for kind of like middle class white families in
Oh.
Queens and Brooklyn, Staten Island.
Right.
So, a pretty specific market, but it turned out to be a profitable one for them.
I think that targeted approach, right, to a particular market segment really speaks to their early business strategy.
Mm-hmm.
They really identified a demand and were able to meet it effectively.
Right.
And as you said, the name itself
Yeah.
really does emphasize that family is
Yeah.
central.
Totally. Now, as the 3 sons, right? So Fred Jr., Donald, Robert, as they got older, they all became involved in the business, right?
Mhm.
Working on the construction sites in the offices.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, right? The daughters, Elizabeth and Marianne,
Yeah.
they didn't have roles in the company.
Yeah, I think that distinction in roles in the family business is really reflective, right?
Yeah.
Of the kind of societal norms of the time.
Yeah, yeah.
And it may have contributed to, the different paths that the children ultimately pursue.
Right, right. And we learned a little bit about his siblings, right? So his older brother, Fred Jr., he became an airline pilot.
Mm,
So, totally different path. But tragically, he died of alcoholism in 1981.
mm-hmm.
And it's significant, right?
Yeah.
That Donald Trump has often cited his brother's struggles as the reason why he himself avoids alcohol.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a pretty powerful personal connection, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
To influence a pretty major life choice.
Yeah, and those kinds of personal experiences can have a profound impact
Right.
on one's own choices.
Hmm.
And I think the family's journey, marked by, both successes and these kinds of losses, is an important part of the context here.
Right, right. Now, looking back at his childhood, there is mention of some early behavioral challenges.
Hmm.
Even his father described him as a pretty rough fellow.
Hmm.
And so this led to, a decision to send him to the New York Military Academy when he was just 13.
Wow.
I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea being to really try to instill some discipline.
Yeah.
And interestingly, Trump has spoken very positively about that time. He said he enjoyed the structure, the drills. It seems like that kind of regimented lifestyle
Yeah.
really, really resonated with him on some level.
Yeah. And this move by his parents it suggests an early recognition
Right.
of a strong personality.
Yeah, yeah.
That they perhaps felt, a structured environment like that
Yeah.
could help to shape.
Right, right. Now, following that, he went on to pursue higher education. He started at Fordham University in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
and then he ended up transferring to the very prestigious Wharton School of Finance and Commerce
Yeah.
at the University of Pennsylvania. And there he graduated with a bachelor's degree in economics in 1968. So, that gave him that formal foundation in business principles, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a degree from Wharton, it's a very well-respected institution.
Yeah.
And so that would have certainly equipped him
Yeah.
with a good, formal understanding of economic theory, business practices, and things that would have been, valuable as he embarked on his career.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, let's turn to a period that I think a lot of people are interested in, the Vietnam War, right?
Yeah.
So, this is the late 1960s, early 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
He's in his early 20s,
Mm-hmm.
and he receives several college deferments, right? Which were pretty common at the time for students. And then following those, he actually receives a medical deferment due to a physician's diagnosis of bone spurs.
Yeah, I mean, this period, right, and the circumstances around, his deferments, I
Yeah.
think have been, subjects of considerable discussion, right?
Sure.
And the fact that he received these deferments meant that he didn't serve in the military
That's right.
during that conflict.
And then, of course, the draft lottery system is implemented in 1969, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in that, his birthday draws a really high number, 356 out of 366.
Wow.
So, even without the deferments, it seems like he likely wouldn't have been, called for service.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that lottery number essentially confirmed,
Yeah.
his non-participation in the draft, and it's an interesting kind of intersection, right, of his personal circumstances,
Yeah, yeah.
and then the broader kind of mechanisms of the draft system at that time.
So let's move now into, his early business career.
Yeah.
And we see that, even while he was still in college, he started investing in real estate in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that kind of shows you, this real early drive.
It does. It indicates a very, proactive entrepreneurial kind of mindset,
Yeah, yeah.
taking initiative,
Hmm.
even before completing his formal education.
And then after he graduates in 68, he joins his father's business full-time in New York.
Mm-hmm.
But his early career wasn't without its challenges, right?
Mm-hmm.
In 1973, the U.S. Justice Department actually accused the Trump company of discriminatory practices
Mm-hmm.
against African-American rental applicants.
Yeah, that's a significant early event, right?
Yeah.
It really raises important questions about, the practices of the company
Yeah.
and the social context
Of course.
in which it operated.
So ultimately, the Trump company settled that matter,
Mm-hmm.
and they agreed to rent more apartments to black tenants, although they did not admit to any wrongdoing.
Right.
But this early legal challenge, I think, is a pretty notable point in the company's history.
Yeah, I mean, the settlement itself, right, even without an admission of guilt, it suggests, a need to address the allegations and potentially, modify their business practices.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a formative episode.
Right. Now, throughout the 1970s, while he's still involved in the family business, Donald Trump starts to kind of look beyond those established markets, right?
Mm.
So, Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island, the places where his father had really focused.
Right.
He explores some opportunities in Virginia and Ohio, Nevada, California, but really, his sights are set on Manhattan.
Right.
And the more kind of prestigious and lucrative market that represented.
Yeah, I
But
mean that geographical expansion shows ambition, right? But the focus on Manhattan
yeah,
really signals a desire to kind of elevate
yeah,
the family business, right, into the kind of highest echelons
hmm
of the New York real estate scene. It's about, prestige as much as profit.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And by the mid 1970s, we see a really significant change. Right,
Hmm.
the company is rebranded as the Trump Organization.
Right.
And this kind of coincides with their move into developing Manhattan skyscrapers.
Hmm.
And so it really marks a new direction for the business, right? And it solidifies the Trump name as a central brand.
Yeah, I mean that renaming I think was a very strategic step.
Yeah. Well.
It was about directly linking the family's growing success and future aspirations
hmm
to the Trump name.
Right, right.
It's about building that powerful personal and corporate identity.
Okay. So his first major kind of foray into Manhattan was the development of the Grand Hyatt Hotel.
Hmm.
This was back in 1976.
Okay.
And this was on the site of the old bankrupt Penn Central Railroad's Commodore Hotel.
Okay.
And this deal really exemplifies his early approach to business and deal making.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting here is that the Trump organization didn't actually have the capital
Right.
to purchase the Commodore Hotel outright.
Right.
And so this required a creative approach to, financing and partnership.
Exactly. So he leverages his personal connections, right? I mean,
Right.
he had relationships with the Hyatt hotel chain. He relies on the political influence of his father,
Mm.
Fred Trump, who was a very well-connected Democrat in Brooklyn.
Right.
And using all of that, he negotiates this really incredible deal with the New York City government.
Yeah, I think it appears that a lot of this early success was really built on this combination of, personal relationships, family influence, and political maneuvering.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a pattern I think that we see throughout his career.
Totally. So the result of all this was a 40-year tax abatement from New York City
Wow.
on the property. So, just to clarify what that means,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's basically a significant reduction or even an elimination of the property taxes he would normally owe
Hmm.
for that period of time.
Right.
And that can be, it's a huge financial benefit that makes a lot of these large development projects viable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that tax abatement was critical
Yeah.
in making this deal work. I mean, it
Yeah.
significantly reduces the financial risk,
Right.
and provides it's a substantial, competitive edge.
So initially, this abatement was valued at $4 million per year. And it's estimated that over those 4 decades, it was worth something like $400 million.
Wow.
After you factor in inflation and changes to the tax code.
Uh-huh.
And so he basically used that future tax break
Right.
as leverage to convince the Commodore to sell and to bring Hyatt in as a partner.
Smart.
And there's this great quote. It's attributed to New York's mayor at the time, Abraham Beame, and he reportedly said, "Whatever my friends Fred and Donald want in this town, they get."
Wow.
So, I mean, that kind of sums up the political connections, right?
It does. It really paints a picture, right? I mean, if it's accurate, it certainly paints a picture of the influence that the Trump family
Right.
held within New York City's political circles at the time.
Yeah.
It highlights that that close relationship between business and political power.
Yeah.
In securing these kinds of deals.
So the 1980s is really, this period where Donald Trump really establishes himself, right, as this prominent figure in real estate. He develops Trump Plaza, which was this big 36-story cooperative apartment complex.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's the iconic Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue,
Yeah.
which, housed these luxury retail spaces and actually his personal residence and the headquarters of the Trump Organization. So, I mean, these were really high visibility projects, right?
They were. I mean, they really solidified his image as a builder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of luxurious, significant properties in prime locations.
Mm.
And Trump Tower, of course, I mean, that became
Yeah.
an internationally recognized
Yeah.
symbol of wealth and ambition.
Right, right. And he also kind of diversifies his interests a bit, right? So he gets into the casino business in Atlantic City, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And this included, the Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino, which actually started out as Harrah's at Trump Plaza. There was Trump Castle.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, in 1990, there's the massive Trump Taj Mahal,
Right.
which cost nearly $1 billion to build.
Wow.
And which he famously declared to be the eighth wonder of the world.
It's quite a this expansion into the casino industry. I mean,
Yeah.
that was a bold move. It
Mm-hmm.
represents a significant diversification of his portfolio.
Right, right.
And a high stakes venture,
Right.
right, into a very competitive market.
But this era of rapid expansion and high visibility, it was followed by some serious financial challenges.
Mm-hmm.
To fund all of the hotels and casinos, he'd relied heavily on borrowing.
Mm-hmm.
And by 1990, he was facing some pretty severe financial difficulties.
Right.
So, I think we see a pattern here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the reliance on substantial debt created, a very leveraged financial structure,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that can amplify both gains and losses.
Right.
So this level of borrowing really exposed his businesses
Yeah.
to a considerable amount of financial risk.
Right, right. And things got so bad that his father, Fred Trump, who was, in his late 80s at this point,
Wow.
he made this really, really unusual move.
Mm-hmm.
He went to Trump Castle,
Mm-hmm.
and he purchased over $3 million in casino chips.
Wow.
And this was reportedly done to help the casino, show that it had enough cash flow
Yeah.
to make an interest payment.
Right.
But this move was later, deemed to be an illegal loan by regulators in New Jersey,
Mm-hmm.
and it resulted in a $65,000 fine.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's quite a picture, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got his father
Yeah.
in his 80s
Mm-hmm.
going and essentially bailing out his son's casino
Right.
with this huge chip purchase.
It highlights, the severity of this situation.
Yeah,
Right. That his businesses were facing.
yeah.
And the extent to which, the family
Right.
was willing to provide support. And then, of course, the regulatory repercussions as well
Yeah.
really underscore, how serious this was.
So this period of financial strain, it culminates in bankruptcy filings for two of his major holdings. So we're talking about the Trump Taj Mahal in 1991
Right.
and the Trump Plaza Hotel in 1992.
Yeah.
And to add to these challenges, right? I mean, there's this really unflattering biography that comes out,
Mm.
and it's called Lost Tycoon.
Lost Tycoon. Oh,
And this is posted in 1993,
Right.
and it really kind of portrays him in this really negative light.
Right.
Following all of these business failures, they even labeled him as a public laughingstock.
Right.
So, it seems like a pretty significant downturn, right?
Yeah. I mean, this period definitely marked a low point, right,
Hmm.
in his business career, his
Yeah.
public image.
Yeah,
I mean, the
Yeah.
bankruptcy filings,
Mhm.
right? I mean, those were public events.
of course.
And I think the biography really captured
Yeah.
kind of that prevailing
Yeah.
negative sentiment
Yeah.
around his financial troubles.
But Donald Trump, he demonstrated this remarkable ability to kind of bounce back.
Mm-hmm.
And in the years that followed these bankruptcies, he kind of strategically utilized bankruptcy protection to restructure the debts
Mm-hmm.
of various entities
Right.
within the Trump organization.
Right.
And he managed to continue making these debt payments even while the total amount of debt he held reportedly increased, right?
Mhm.
Often at higher interest rates. And so in 2011, he kind of, he made this statement. He said, I've used the laws of this country to pare debt.
Yeah, his ability to navigate these complex financial situations, right, and leverage the bankruptcy laws to his advantage
Yeah.
is a key aspect,
Right.
right, of his business acumen. Although, of course, it's a practice
Yeah.
that's drawn a lot of criticism.
Now, as part of this financial restructuring, he forms this publicly traded company,
Mm-hmm.
and it was called Trump Hotels and Casino Resorts.
Okay.
And this move kind of you know, it had a couple of effects,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it shielded him personally from some of the financial liabilities,
Right.
and it allowed him to raise some capital through the sale of stock.
Right.
And so initially he held a majority stake in this company, so that gave him, significant control.
Yeah. Taking the company public, right?
Mm-hmm.
Provides access to, capital markets,
Mm-hmm.
but it also, it introduces these new levels of scrutiny,
Right.
right? Of regulatory oversight, at least in theory.
Right, right. But by 2004, this publicly traded company was really struggling.
Mm-hmm.
It was unable to meet its loan obligations,
Mm-hmm.
and it was consistently failed to achieve profitability.
Right.
And so as a result, it also filed for bankruptcy protection.
Okay.
And during this period, Trump reduced his personal stock holdings in the company.
Mm-hmm.
And that led to, a less active role in its management.
Right. I think the failure of this publicly traded company, right?
Yeah.
Despite his initial control, right,
Mm-hmm.
and the kind of infusion of public capital,
Yeah.
it suggests, that there were some pretty fundamental challenges either within the business model
Yeah.
or its management,
Mm-hmm.
and his kind of decreased involvement. Yeah. Likely reflected a need to distance himself
Right, right.
from its ongoing difficulties.
So Trump attributed these failures to the overall decline of Atlantic City as a gambling destination.
Mm-hmm.
But critics pointed out that his casinos had experienced difficulties even when the broader Atlantic City gambling economy was doing okay.
Right. Yeah.
So, that's kind of an important question, right? I mean, what were the primary factors contributing to these bankruptcies? Was it just external market conditions?
Right.
Or were there, other underlying issues with his specific ventures?
I think that discrepancy, right,
Mm-hmm.
between his explanation
Yeah.
and the assessments of critics really highlights just how complex it is to kind of attribute, business failures to single causes.
Totally.
Right. It suggests we need to consider a range of, internal and external factors.
Yeah, absolutely. And despite efforts to revive the company, it ultimately went bankrupt again
Mm-hmm.
in 2009 and again in 2014. And by the time he announces his candidacy for president in 2015, all of his gambling business operations had basically ceased.
Wow.
So, this really marked a definitive end to his involvement in that industry. And this had consequences, right? I mean, for shareholders, vendors, creditors,
Absolutely.
a lot of people suffered losses.
Yeah, I mean, those repeated bankruptcies ultimately led to his complete exit
Yeah.
from the casino industry. And as you said, that had a real ripple effect, right?
Yeah.
Impacting, various stakeholders.
Right, right. And while those bankruptcies caused, as you said, losses for a lot of people, it's important to note that Donald Trump himself managed to mitigate his own financial losses,
Mm-hmm.
through various financial and legal maneuvers. So, it's crucial to point out that the impact of these business failures wasn't, uniformly felt.
Yeah, that ability to kind of navigate, these financial storms and protect his personal wealth,
Mm-hmm.
even as his companies faced bankruptcy, is a real testament, right?
Yeah, yeah.
To his understanding and utilization. Host speaker.